When I asked what time my son's funeral would be, my daughter-in-law said, "He's been gone a long time. You weren't supposed to be there." A week later, she called me in a panic. "Why are you ruining my life?" "I'll tell you everything, but first, stick with me till the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I know how far my story has reached." My name is Martin Wells. I'm 71 years old, and a retired history teacher from Elmsboro, Pennsylvania. Andrew was my only son, a curious kid who grew up between the books in my library and the trails we'd hike together on weekends. He had this thirst for knowledge that reminded me of my own youth, always asking questions about everything. From a young age, he showed a natural kindness that made me proud to be his dad. Have you ever had a child who just seemed born with their heart in the right place? That's how I saw Andrew. He was my purest pride, my greatest accomplishment in life. Ever since he married Julia 5 years ago, he became quieter, more reserved. In the few phone calls we had, his voice sounded different, like he was always measuring his words. He said he was busy with his work as an environmental engineer in California, but something in the way he spoke left me uneasy. You know that feeling when your child seems distant and you just can't figure out why? That's exactly what stayed with me after every call. I thought it was just the stress of a new job. As a father, you always want to believe the best version of the story. I never intruded on my son's space. I always believed that real love gives room to grow, but I also never gave up my place as his father. I think every parent hopes for a genuine family reconciliation when things cool off. Andrew knew I'd always be there for him if he needed me, even with all those miles between Pennsylvania and California. Sometimes I wonder if I should have visited more, called more often. But how do you force a closeness that seems to be fading on its own? I had no idea what was coming. The routine of trying to stay in touch with Andrew had turned into a constant battle in recent months. It was always Julia who answered the phone. "He's busy, Martin. He's in an important meeting. He'll call you later." But later never came. I tried calling at different times, sent messages, even letters through the mail. Nothing. It was like my own son had simply disappeared from my life. Have you ever had that feeling that someone is deliberately avoiding you, but you can't understand why? That's exactly how I felt every time she picked up the phone. Weeks turned into months without a real conversation with Andrew. Julia always had a new excuse, a different explanation. "He's taken on a big project. He's been traveling a lot. He's not feeling well lately." That last one deeply worried me, but when I asked for details, she was evasive. "Nothing serious, Martin. Just work stress." But her voice didn't convince me. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As a father, you develop a kind of intuition for these things. My daughter-in-law was sabotaging every attempt at contact, and I was beginning to suspect there was something much more serious behind all of this. Then I got an unexpected call from an old college friend of Andrew's. "Mr. Wells, this is David. I worked with your son at the engineering firm. I just wanted to offer my condolences for Andrew's passing." My mind went blank. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" There was an awkward silence on the other end. "Sir, Andrew passed away last week. I thought you knew." I called Julia immediately, hands shaking. "Julia, what happened? Why didn't anyone tell me?" She sighed, as if tired of a conversation that hadn't even started. "He's long gone, Martin. It didn't concern you." After hanging up with Julia, the first thing I did was call the Riverton Regional Hospital. "Andrew Wells? We don't have that name in our recent records," said the receptionist. I tried to explain that he had passed away a week ago, but she insisted there was no information available to me. How could there be no record? Every death has to be registered, especially in a hospital. Something about all this was very strange. Were they even hiding basic information from me? As his father, I had the right to at least know where my son had died. I then tried Memorial Gardens Funeral Home, whose name I got from the college colleague. "Sir, the service was last Monday. It was closed to close family only," the director said. When I asked why I hadn't been informed, being the father, he sounded uncomfortable on the phone. "Mrs. Julia said you preferred not to be notified due to family circumstances." What family circumstances? I was his father. I hung up the call more confused than ever. How can a father not even have the right to know his son has died? This old man needed to seek justice somehow, but I still didn't know how. I quietly walked into my home library, where I always took refuge during the hardest times. I opened the desk drawer where I kept the folder with the few emails Andrew had sent me over the past 2 years. The folder was much thinner than I wished, a clear sign of how our communication had faded. I took each printed email and laid them out on the mahogany table I'd inherited from my father. There were so few, they could all fit on a single page if I put them together. You know that feeling of holding the last traces of a relationship you can no longer reach? That's exactly what it felt like. I read each one again, searching for clues I might have missed the first time. Short. Formal. Hey Dad, hope all's well. Work's been hectic. Talk later. And always with a strange feeling like there was a shadow of Julia hanging over every word. The messages grew more distant after the wedding, and now I could clearly see the pattern. It felt like my own son was being forced to keep his distance from me. Every email sounded like it was written with someone looking over his shoulder. The reality was forming in my mind in the cruelest way. I picked up the phone and called Harold Morrison, my lawyer of over 20 years. Harold, I need to understand what rights I have as a father when it comes to a child's death. He was silent for a few seconds. Harold was never silent. Martin, did something happen? I explained the whole situation, finding out about the death, being excluded from the funeral, Julia's lies. He listened patiently, jotting a few things down. I'll start looking into this immediately. As a family lawyer, I can tell you something's not right. His voice had that professional tone I knew well. He had found something suspicious. Harold called me back 2 hours later, and his voice sounded completely different from usual. Martin, you need to come to my office first thing tomorrow. I've uncovered some very important things about Andrew's case. My heart was racing. Harold only used that tone when something truly serious came up. Can you at least give me a hint of what you found? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath before saying something that changed everything forever. The will was changed 3 weeks before his death, and your name is on it. The next morning, I arrived early at Harold's office with a list in hand. Hospital, registrar's office, obituary, funeral home, lawyer. Each item was a piece of the puzzle I needed to put together. Harold, I need your help to get access to all this information. He adjusted his glasses and grabbed a notepad. Martin, let's do this methodically. As your lawyer, I can request documents you wouldn't be able to get on your own. The determination in his voice gave me hope. Finally, someone was taking my situation seriously. This overlooked old man was about to uncover the truth about his own son. We started with the hospital. Harold called the legal department at Riverton Regional Hospital directly. I need the medical reports for Andrew Wells, who passed away last week. There was a long pause before the response left us stunned. Mr. Morrison, we can't release that information without a specific court order. There are confidentiality issues involved. Harold frowned. In 30 years of practicing law, he had never faced this kind of resistance for a parent seeking access to a child's records. What kind of confidentiality issues? The clerk was evasive. I can't discuss details over the phone. Something was definitely wrong. The funeral home wasn't any more cooperative. When Harold identified himself as my legal representative, the director at Memorial Gardens completely changed his tone. Mr. Morrison, we're going to need a court order to release any information about the arrangements. The immediate family requested full privacy. Immediate family? I was his father. Harold wrote everything down carefully. This is extremely unusual, he muttered. In normal cases, the father would have unrestricted access to this kind of information. It was becoming clear that Julia had set up legal barriers to keep me out. But why? What was she hiding about Andrew's death? That's when Harold found the first solid clue. While digging through public records, he uncovered something that shifted our entire perspective. Martin, look at this. Andrew's life insurance policy, updated just 2 months ago. He pointed to the beneficiary line. Your name was removed and replaced with Julia Wells only. My stomach turned. Andrew had named me as the beneficiary when he first set up the policy years ago. It was his way of saying I still mattered in his life. But there's something even more interesting, Harold continued. The change was made 3 weeks before his death, the same time as the will. We decided to try reaching out to Julia directly, but when I called, I found out she had changed her number. The automated message said, "The number you dialed is no longer in service." Harold tried the one listed in the legal documents. Same result. "She's deliberately hiding," he concluded. "This is not the behavior of someone grieving. It's the behavior of someone hiding something." We then tried social media, but all of Julia's accounts had either been deactivated or blocked. It was like she had completely vanished from the digital world. A grieving widow doesn't usually erase all traces of contact. That afternoon, Harold received a call that changed everything. "Martin, you're not going to believe this. I just spoke to David Hartwell, a lawyer in Riverton who was representing Andrew." My heart started racing. Representing him for what? Harold flipped through his notes quickly. Apparently Andrew sought legal counsel a month ago. And according to Hartwell, your name appears in several documents Andrew was preparing. That meant my son had been thinking about me even in his final weeks. Hartwell wants to meet. He said he has important information about Andrew's true intentions. Attorney David Hartwell couldn't say much over the phone, but the little he did say was enough to give me chills. "Mr. Wells, your son came to me because he was concerned about certain family matters. He was trying to protect specific interests." "Protect what interests?" "I can tell you he mentioned you several times in our meetings, and he left very specific instructions about what to do if something were to happen to him." Specific instructions? Andrew was anticipating his own death. Harold and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Mr. Hartwell, can we meet in person?" We needed to understand what Andrew had discovered, or feared. We scheduled the meeting for Friday at 10 a.m. at David Hartwell's office in Riverton. "Mr. Wells, I need to warn you that some of the information may be disturbing," he said before hanging up. Disturbing how? My mind was racing with possibilities, all of them dark. Harold closed the file and looked at me seriously. "Martin, prepare yourself mentally. From what I'm seeing, Andrew found out something about Julia that deeply concerned him. The trip to Riverton would be Thursday night. It was only 2 days away, but it felt like an eternity when you're about to uncover secrets that could change your life forever. For the rest of the week, I tried to keep to my normal routine, but it was impossible to focus on anything. I reread Andrew's emails looking for signs I might have missed. Now, with this new perspective, some sentences took on different meanings. "Dad, sometimes things aren't what they seem," he had written 6 months ago. At the time, I thought he was talking about work pressure. What if he was talking about Julia? "I hope one day you'll understand my choices," another email said. What choices? I started to realize my son had been trying to send me coded messages, but I hadn't understood them. The anxiety was eating me alive when Harold called Thursday morning. "Martin, I got some preliminary information from contacts at the registry office. The will was indeed changed, but there's something strange. The signatures were made at different offices on different days. Did that mean something suspicious? In normal cases, all changes are made in the same place, on the same day. This seems fragmented." Harold was choosing his words carefully. "Also, I found records showing that Andrew visited the notary several times in the weeks before his death. Alone. Julia didn't know about these visits. The plot was getting more complex with each new discovery. On the eve of the trip, I got an unexpected call from David Hartwell himself. "Mr. Wells, I need to move our meeting to a more private location. My office may not be the best place for what we need to discuss." More private? What the hell had Andrew uncovered? "Can we meet at Riverside Cafe on Main Street? It's more discreet." Discreet for what? My head was spinning with theories. Harold agreed to the change. He was also sensing that something much bigger was behind all this. "Martin, get ready to learn things that might completely change how you see the last few years." Thursday night, while packing for the trip to Riverton, I found an old photo of Andrew in the dresser drawer. It was from the last Christmas we spent together, 3 years ago. He was smiling, but looking at the photo now, I could see something in his eyes. A sadness I had once dismissed as exhaustion. What if even back then he was starting to see the manipulation? What if Andrew had been trying to protect me from something he'd discovered about Julia? The photo shook in my hand. Tomorrow, I would finally learn the truth about what happened to my son. Harold called one last time before we left for Riverton. "Martin, I just got another disturbing piece of information. David Hartwell mentioned that Andrew was particularly concerned about your safety in the last few weeks. My safety? Apparently, your son left specific instructions on how to reach me in case something happened to him. That meant Andrew had anticipated his own death? Hartwell said there are documents Andrew prepared specifically to protect you from something. Or someone. The call ended with a chill running down my spine. I had a feeling that nothing would ever be the same after that conversation with David Hartwell. We arrived at Riverside Cafe exactly at 10 a.m. on Friday. David Hartwell was already there, a brown folder on the table and 2 steaming cups of coffee. He was a man in his 50s, gray-haired, with that serious look only seasoned lawyers develop. "Mr. Wells, Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming." His voice was deep, heavy with a solemn tone that made me even more nervous. Harold and I sat down across from him, and I noticed my hands were slightly trembling. Something in the air at that cafe was about to change my life forever. David slowly opened the folder, as if revealing evidence of a crime. "Before we begin, you need to understand something, Mr. Wells. Your son came to me 6 weeks ago because he was afraid." "Afraid? Afraid of what?" "He said he discovered things about his wife that deeply disturbed him." David flipped through some documents. "Andrew was convinced Julia had purposely manipulated the relationship between the two of you." My stomach turned. "He told me he only realized the extent of the manipulation when he decided to investigate on his own some strange situations." Harold was jotting down everything meticulously. "What kind of situations?" David sighed deeply before saying something that chilled my blood. "How could a father suspect that his daughter-in-law was sabotaging the family?" "This is from your son," David said, pulling a smaller folder from the main one. It was a handwritten letter in Andrew's familiar handwriting. My throat instantly went dry. David adjusted his glasses and began to read. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means something happened to me and Mr. Hartwell followed my instructions. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the whole cafe could hear it. I need you to know that everything that happened between us in the last 5 years was orchestrated by Julia." Harold stopped writing and looked at me with concern. "Orchestrated? Orchestrated how?" David kept reading in a steady voice. "Julia told me you didn't want to see me anymore. I didn't believe her." The words came out of David's mouth like punches to my gut. "What do you mean I didn't want to see my own son?" David paused the reading and looked at me. "Mr. Wells, did you ever say anything like that to Julia?" I shook my head vigorously. "Never. I never said that." Harold leaned forward. "Please keep reading." But David closed the letter. "There's more. Much more. But first I need to show you other evidence Andrew gathered." 3 seconds of absolute silence hung over our table. What else had my son uncovered? David pulled out another envelope from the folder. "Your son hired a private investigator, and he left you a letter." "A private investigator? To investigate his own wife?" "Andrew hired a detective named Michael Torres 2 months ago. The findings were disturbing." "Disturbing how?" My mind was racing. "Torres discovered that Julia had created a systematic pattern of isolation. Every gift you sent that came back, every call that wasn't passed through, every visit that was sabotaged." Harold frowned. "Is that documented?" David nodded. "All of it. Andrew kept evidence of everything." "What do you mean he kept evidence? My son was investigating his own wife without her knowing?" "There's more," David continued, pulling out a series of photographs. "Julia intercepted your mail, Mr. Wells. Letters you sent were deliberately returned. Gifts were donated to charity before Andrew ever saw them. The photos showed Julia in various situations. At the post office, at charity shops, always with packages that looked familiar. Andrew started to suspect when he found one of your letters in the trash, a letter Julia claimed had never arrived. My vision blurred with anger. He installed hidden cameras in their home to document her behavior." "Hidden cameras? What kind of marriage was this?" David then showed a series of printed emails. "These are emails Julia sent pretending to be Andrew, Mr. Wells. She had access to his accounts and replied as if she were your son. Those short, formal emails I received over the past years, they weren't from Andrew? Your son found out when he realized you were getting replies to emails he'd never seen." I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. Andrew told me he was horrified when he realized Julia was completely controlling the communication between the two of you. Harold murmured, "This is systemic psychological manipulation." It was worse than that. It was emotional imprisonment. But the most disturbing discovery came later, David continued, his voice even more serious. The investigator found out that Julia had done this before, to other members of her own family. Other people. She isolated her mother from all her friends in her final years. She cut off her brother from his wife and children. My God, was this premeditated? Andrew uncovered a pattern of behavior that had repeated for years. Harold and I exchanged alarmed looks. Julia carefully selected her targets. Older, vulnerable people. David paused before continuing. And they all had one thing in common. What? Significant assets that ended up under her control after those people became estranged from their families. The next revelation took my breath away. Andrew discovered that Julia had made changes to financial documents without his knowledge. Bank accounts, investments, insurance, everything was gradually being transferred into her name. David paused to give me time to process. Your son realized he had been financially manipulated for months. For months? She used highly sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques. She made Andrew doubt his own memory, his own perception. Harold was scribbling furiously. And when Andrew started to question things, she intensified his isolation from any emotional support, especially from me, his only close relative. That's when Andrew came to see me, David explained. He was desperate and afraid. He said Julia had started making subtle threats. Threats. She would say things like, "It would be a shame if something happened and you ended up alone in the world." My skin prickled all over. Andrew took those as indirect threats to your safety, Mr. Wells. My safety? He was convinced Julia saw you as an obstacle to her plans. David flipped through a few more documents. That's why he started preparing legal documents to protect you. And that's why he changed the will. Changed the will to protect me? David then pulled out another sealed envelope from the folder. This is an envelope Andrew left with very specific instructions. It was only to be opened if something happened to him. Something had happened. He told me, if something happens to me, this envelope will explain everything to my dad. My son knew something could happen? David began carefully opening the envelope. Mr. Wells, what's inside here is going to completely change how you understand the past few years. Harold leaned forward. And it will explain why Julia did everything she could to keep you away from the funeral and any investigation. David paused with the envelope half open. Your son discovered something about Julia that went far beyond emotional manipulation. The tension in the cafe was unbearable as David finally opened the envelope and pulled out a longer letter. This is the full letter Andrew wrote to you, and there's also evidence he collected over the last 2 months. Evidence of what? Mr. Wells, brace yourself. What your son uncovered about Julia will change everything you thought you knew about her. David paused, looking directly into my eyes. But before we read the rest of the letter, I need to warn you about something Andrew discovered in the last days of his life. David held the letter tightly. He found evidence that Julia was not who she claimed to be, and that other people close to her had questionable deaths. David held the letter for a few more seconds before continuing. There's information here that's going to shock you, Mr. Wells. Andrew found records, documents, evidence suggesting something far more sinister than manipulation. What could be more sinister? But he wanted you to know the truth, no matter how disturbing it might be. David looked at Harold and then back at me. The letter will reveal not only what Julia did to the two of you, but also what Andrew suspects she may have done to other people. David began unfolding the letter slowly. Your son left evidence that his death may not have been an accident, Mr. Wells, and that you might be in danger too. David unfolded the letter completely and placed it on the table between us. Mr. Wells, I'm going to read the full letter Andrew left for you now. My breathing was uneven. After so many partial revelations, I was finally about to learn everything my son had wanted to tell me. Harold held my hand for a second, a gesture of support that gave me strength. David began reading in a clear, steady voice. Dad, I was wrong to let her speak for you. You never stopped being my father. Tears started streaming down my face. My son knew. He had always known I would never abandon him. Julia had built a wall between us, but the love between father and son had remained intact the whole time. The letter went on, revealing every detail of the manipulation. Andrew described how Julia intercepted phone calls, how she lied about my availability, how she came up with elaborate excuses to keep us apart. She made me believe you were disappointed in my choices, that you thought I had changed too much after marriage. Disappointed? I was never disappointed in my son, just confused by the sudden distance. I started to doubt everything when I found your birthday card in the trash, the one Julia said never arrived. He had found my card in the trash? That's when I realized she was systematically destroying our relationship. Systematic destruction. That's exactly what it was. Julia had orchestrated our separation like a military campaign. But what hit me the hardest was the next part of the letter. Andrew had left everything to me. The house, the life insurance, the savings. Everything Julia thought would be hers was now mine. Dad, everything I have goes to you. The house, the insurance, my savings, everything. Julia thinks she'll inherit it all, but I changed everything legally 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before his death, exactly as Harold had found. My son had protected himself and me at the same time. I did this not out of spite, but because I realized you're the only family I really have left. Harold was writing furiously as David kept reading. Justice was being delivered by Andrew himself. The final part of the letter was the most emotional. Dad, if something happens to me, do what you feel is right. Justice, not revenge. Justice, not revenge. My son knew my character better than I did. He knew I wouldn't seek personal vengeance, but that I would do what was right. Julia needs help, but she also needs to face consequences for what she did to us and to others. Others? Had other people truly been victims of hers? Use the evidence I gathered. Make sure she can't do this to another family. David closed the letter and looked at me with respect. Your son was a very wise man, Mr. Wells, and he loved you deeply. The mix of relief and pain in my chest was beyond words. After finishing the reading, David checked his watch. Mr. Wells, now we need to confront Julia with this evidence. As Andrew's lawyer, I have a legal obligation to resolve this situation. Harold nodded. We should do this officially. David picked up the phone. I'll call her and ask her to come to my office. I'll say there are a few estate documents she needs to sign. It was the perfect excuse. Julia would definitely come expecting to collect her inheritance. She won't suspect anything until she's face to face with us. Harold and I agreed. This confrontation had to happen, but in a controlled and legal way. This deceived old man would finally get the chance to hear the truth from the manipulator herself. David made the call right in front of us. Julia, this is David Hartwell. I need you to come to my office this afternoon. There are a few final estate documents that require your signature. Judging by his expression, she was asking questions. No, nothing complicated, just legal formalities to release a few assets. Pause. Yes, 3 p.m. works fine, thank you. He hung up and looked at us. She's coming. From the tone of her voice, she's eager to wrap up the paperwork quickly. Harold smirked. She thinks she's about to sign inheritance documents. Little does she know she's about to sign a confession. We headed straight to David's office to wait for her arrival. At David's office, we methodically laid out all the evidence on the table. Photos of Julia intercepting mail, the forged emails, the private investigators' reports, records of financial changes. Everything was there, undeniable. When she gets here, we'll present the evidence gradually, David explained. First Andrew's letter, then the manipulation evidence. Harold added, and finally the actual terms of the will. That'll be the final blow. I just took a deep breath, trying to prepare myself to confront the woman who had stolen precious years from my relationship with my son. Justice was about to be served. At exactly 3 p.m., we heard a knock on the door. David answered and returned with Julia, who looked tense but confident. She saw me sitting in the room and frowned. Martin? What are you doing here? Her voice held a mix of surprise and irritation. David motioned for her to sit. Mrs. Julia, Mr. Wells is here because the matters we need to resolve involve the family directly. She sat down hesitantly, eyeing the documents spread across the table with suspicion. What kind of matters? Harold introduced himself formally. I'm Harold Morrison, Mr. Wells's attorney. We're here to address certain irregularities discovered in Andrew's estate. Julia tried to argue before even seeing the evidence. I don't understand why Martin needs to be involved in this. Andrew and I were married. I'm the only legal heir. David shook his head. Actually, Mrs. Julia, we found that this information is not accurate. He placed Andrew's letter in front of her. Your husband left very specific instructions regarding his true intentions. She looked at the letter with growing suspicion. I was trying to protect him from disappointment, she said, using the same excuse as always. Andrew was stressed. He didn't need more family drama. Harold interrupted. Mrs. Julia, we have evidence that you systematically intercepted communications between father and son. That's when I presented the documents David had shown me. Julia, we have proof. Reports from the private investigator, dates of the interceptions, messages you faked in Andrew's name. I placed the photographs on the table one by one. Your visits to the post office returning my mail. Donations of the gifts I sent before Andrew ever saw them. She looked at each photo as if seeing ghosts. Harold added, we also have records of financial changes you made without his knowledge. David then showed the insurance contracts. And we have evidence you followed the same isolation pattern with other members of your family. Julia began trembling visibly. There was no way to deny photographic and documented proof. Tears began to roll down her face, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were from the panic of being exposed. Martin, you don't understand. I didn't mean to cut you out completely, I just thought. She paused, searching for words that might sound convincing. Andrew was very sensitive. He got depressed when you two argued. Argued? We never argued. I just wanted to protect his marriage. Harold shook his head. Mrs. Julia, psychological manipulation is not protection. It's abuse. David added firmly. And systematically isolating family members is a form of emotional violence. Julia looked around the office like she was searching for a way out, but there was no escape from the evidence laid out before her. David then pulled out the final document. Mrs. Julia, as executor of Andrew Wells's estate, I need to inform you of the actual terms of his will. She straightened in her chair, expecting to hear about her inheritance. Your husband left the Riverton house to you, as a gesture of goodwill. Her face showed momentary relief. But everything else, insurance, investments, bank accounts, all of it, goes into a trust in his name, with Mr. Martin Wells as the sole beneficiary. Her jaw dropped. This can't be right. I'm his wife. David placed the documents in front of her. The papers were legally updated 3 weeks before his death, Mrs. Julia. Your husband uncovered your actions. Reality was finally catching up with her. The final moment came when David presented the document she would have to sign. This is a confession of the manipulative and obstructive actions you committed against the Wells family. Julia looked at the paper like it was poison. If I sign this, David finished, you'll avoid more serious criminal charges that could lead to prison. Harold explained. Mail fraud, electronic fraud, financial manipulation. These are federal crimes, Mrs. Julia. She took the pen with trembling hands. I watched the woman who had destroyed years of my relationship with my son be forced to publicly confess her manipulation. The justice Andrew asked for in his letter was being carried out. Julia signed the confession in silence and left the office humiliated, carrying nothing but the weight of her own actions. A few months after learning the truth about Andrew, I created the Wells Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping grandparents stay connected with their grandchildren after family breakups caused by manipulation or parental alienation. The life insurance money in Andrew's savings found a greater purpose than I ever imagined. The foundation has already helped dozens of families reconnect, offering legal support, psychological counseling, and family mediation. Every case we resolve is a victory against the kind of manipulation Julia practiced on us. Andrew would be proud to know his death wasn't in vain. This abandoned old man turned his pain into hope for others. Every Sunday morning, I visit Andrew's grave at Memorial Gardens Cemetery. I bring fresh flowers and stay for an hour, telling him about the Foundation's cases, about the families we've helped reunite. The cold marble of the headstone has become a place of peace for me, not sorrow. It's where I feel closest to him, where I can speak freely about my feelings without fear of judgment. Sometimes other visitors stop to chat, Some are relatives who also went through family alienation. I've learned our story isn't unique. There are many Julias in the world. Among the personal belongings Andrew left me, the most precious one was hidden in his safe, an old pocket watch that belonged to my father. Along with it was a simple note. "This belongs with you, Dad." I never should have let anyone come between us. I wear that watch every day now, and every time I check the time, I remember the time we lost. Time we'll never get back. The steady ticking of the watch has become like Andrew's heartbeat, always present, always reminding me. It was Julia who built the walls, not my son. A few weeks ago, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photo of Andrew as a child, about 7 years old, smiling on the swing in the backyard of our old house. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as Julia's, it read, "He always talked about you when he was little. I thought you'd like to have this picture." I stared at that image for a long time, my little boy, happy, unaware that one day someone would try to erase our memories. For a moment I felt a flicker of something close to forgiveness for Julia. I didn't respond to Julia's letter, nor did I try to contact her. I simply placed the photo on the living room shelf, next to Andrew's engineering diploma and the letter he wrote to me. Those 3 things tell the whole story. The boy I raised, the man he became, and the truth he uncovered before he died. I don't need anything else to keep his memory alive. Sometimes friends ask if I still feel anger toward Julia, if I want to press criminal charges despite her signed confession. My answer is always the same. Andrew asked for justice, not revenge. Every morning when I pick up the pocket watch and slip it into my vest pocket, I silently reread the last words from Andrew's letter. "You were always my father, and I was always your son." That's what I carry with me now. Not the pain of our separation, but the certainty of love. He didn't cut me out of his life. He chose me. Amid all the lies and manipulation, Andrew found a way to tell me the truth. And that truth turned my pain into purpose, my anger into compassion, and my loneliness into a mission to help other families. My son's legacy isn't the tragedy of his death, but the strength of the love that survived. Now, I'm curious about you, the one who listened to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Leave a comment below and let me know. Meanwhile, I'm leaving one of the channel's favorite stories on the final screen, and I guarantee it'll surprise you. Thanks for watching.